Welcome to Education in Smart Biomedical Engineering, where we explore the latest advancements in biomedical technology. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most important vital signs, blood pressure. Whether you have high blood pressure or not, monitoring your blood pressure is crucial for maintaining good health. So, let's dive in and learn everything you need to know about blood pressure monitoring. Blood pressure. Terms. Before we get into the different types of blood pressure monitoring, let's define some key terms. Blood pressure is the force of blood against the walls of your arteries. It's measured in millimeters of mercury, mmHg, and is recorded as two numbers, such as 120/80 mmHg. The first number is called systolic pressure, which is the pressure in your arteries when your heart beats. The second number is called diastolic pressure, which is the pressure in your arteries when your H. Systolic pressure. The first term we'll discuss is systolic pressure. This is the pressure in your arteries when your heart beats. It's the first number in a blood pressure reading and is measured in millimeters of mercury, mmHg. For example, if your blood pressure is 120/80 mmHg, your systolic pressure is 120 millimeters of mercury. Diastolic pressure. The second term is diastolic pressure. This is the pressure in your arteries when your heart is at rest between beats. It's the second number in a blood pressure reading and is also measured in millimeters of mercury. Continuing with the same example, your diastolic pressure is 80 millimeters of mercury. Pulse pressure. The third term is pulse pressure. This is the difference between systolic and diastolic pressure. In other words, it's the difference between the highest and lowest pressure in your arteries during a heartbeat. In our example, the pulse pressure is 40 millimeters of mercury, 120/80. Mean arterial pressure, MAP. The last term is mean arterial pressure, MAP. This is an important term because it's an indicator of the average pressure in your arteries over time. It's calculated by taking diastolic pressure plus 1/3 of the pulse pressure. In our example, the MAP would be 93 millimeters of mercury, 80 plus 1/3 40. Blood pressure levels. Let's talk about the levels of blood pressure. A normal blood pressure reading is around 120/80 mmHg. High blood pressure, also known as hypertension, is when your blood pressure consistently stays above 130/80 mmHg. On the other hand, low blood pressure, also known as hypotension, is when your blood pressure stays below 90/60 mmHg. Types of blood pressure monitoring, invasive and non-invasive methods. There are two main types of blood pressure monitoring methods, invasive and non-invasive. Invasive methods involve inserting a device into the body, while non-invasive methods do not. Let's take a closer look at each type. Non-invasive methods, auscultation. This is the traditional method of measuring blood pressure using a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff. Oscillometry. This method uses a blood pressure cuff and a computer to measure blood pressure. Photoplethysmography. This method uses infrared light and a sensor to measure blood pressure. Different techniques of invasive methods are percutaneous insertion, implantation, and catheterization. A sphygmomanometer, also known as a blood pressure cuff, is a common device used to measure blood pressure without the need for invasive procedures. So, let's take a closer look at how a sphygmomanometer works and the advantages and disadvantages of this method. Advantages. One of the main advantages of using a sphygmomanometer is that it is non-invasive, meaning there is no need for needles or catheters. It's also relatively inexpensive and easy to use, making it a popular choice for routine blood pressure checks. Disadvantages. One of the main disadvantages of using a sphygmomanometer is that it can be affected by user error. If the cuff is not placed correctly or if the healthcare professional does not listen carefully, the results may not be accurate. Additionally, it is not suitable for critical care setting where constant monitoring is required.
A sphygmomanometer consists of several important parts, including the cuff. The cuff is the part of the sphygmomanometer that wraps around the upper arm. It is made of a flexible material, such as nylon, and can be inflated and deflated using a pump. The pump is used to inflate the cuff to the desired pressure. It is usually a rubber bulb that is squeezed to increase the pressure in the cuff. The gauge is a meter that displays the pressure readings. It may be a dial gauge or a digital display, depending on the type of sphygmomanometer. The release valve is used to control the rate at which the pressure in the cuff is released. This is important for getting accurate readings. The stethoscope is used to listen to the patient's pulse as the pressure in the cuff is released.
We're going to show you how to measure your blood pressure using a sphygmomanometer. Measuring your blood pressure regularly is important for maintaining good health, and with the right tools, it's simple and easy to do. Let's get started. Step 1. Prepare the equipment. Before you begin, you'll need to gather the equipment. You'll need a sphygmomanometer, which consists of a cuff, a pump, a gauge, a release valve, and a stethoscope. You'll also need a comfortable and quiet place to sit and relax, as well as a watch or timer. Step 2. Position the cuff. Next, place the cuff around your upper arm, with the gauge and release valve positioned near your heart. The cuff should be snug but not too tight. Step 3. Inflate the cuff. Use the pump to inflate the cuff to the desired pressure, which is usually indicated on the gauge. The cuff should be inflated until it feels tight but not painful. Step 4. Release the pressure. Once the cuff is inflated, slowly release the pressure using the release valve. As you release the pressure, listen carefully to your pulse with the stethoscope. Step 5. Record the readings. The first sound of blood flow, known as the court cough sound, is the systolic pressure. The point at which the sound disappears is the diastolic pressure. Write down these two readings and use them to calculate your average blood pressure. Invasive blood pressure monitoring involves inserting a device directly into the blood vessels to measure blood pressure readings. Let's explore the different types of invasive blood pressure monitoring methods. Types of invasive blood pressure monitoring: catheterization, pressure transducer, implantable devices. Pressure transducer. It is also called as percutaneous insertion. Another form of invasive blood pressure monitoring is the pressure transducer method. This involves inserting a pressure-sensitive device into a blood vessel and connecting it to a monitoring device. The pressure transducer is able to continuously measure blood pressure readings and transmit them to the monitoring device. Catheterization. One of the most common forms of invasive blood pressure monitoring is catheterization. This method involves inserting a thin, flexible tube called a catheter into a blood vessel, usually through the groin area. The catheter is then threaded to the desired location, such as the heart or brain, to measure blood pressure readings. Implantable devices. For long-term monitoring, implantable devices such as pacemakers or implantable cardioverter defibrillators can be used to measure blood pressure readings. These devices are surgically implanted and connected to a monitoring device, allowing for continuous monitoring of blood pressure readings.